Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we distill complex sources into the knowledge you need. Today, we are undertaking a really critical mission. We're dissecting a legal case that feels like it's less about a specific crime and more about the boundaries between law, academic freedom, and political thought.
Our focus is the case of a Dr. Chen Jingyuan. He's an independent scholar, PhD in physics and complex systems theory. In 2022, he was arrested in Kunming and eventually imprisoned for his online activity.
And this really is a collision course, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
The charge at the heart of this deep dive is what makes it so fascinating and, frankly, a little alarming. It's the famously elastic picking quarrels and provoking trouble, or PQP.
And specifically for fabricating facts and spreading them on the information network, causing severe public disorder.
Right, so the sources we have, they're kind of split. We have the official documents on one side, the indictment, the verdicts.
But then, and this is crucial, we also have these incredibly detailed legal and philosophical critiques of that conviction. We're looking at the gap between what the court ruled and what, fundamental principles of law would seem to demand.
So we're not just reading dry statutes today. We're looking at how a system reacted when it was confronted by complex system science and how that reaction holds up against, well, some heavy hitters. Mill, Locke, Hayek, Rawls.
Exactly. Our goal is to map the intellectual battleground that Dr. Chen's defense built to challenge the application of this very flexible law.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, the outcome, and the framework. Dr. Chen is arrested in September 2022. By April 2023, he's sentenced to 1 year and 8 months.
And the appeal was swift and decisive. The court refused an open hearing and just upheld the conviction.
To really get why that's so significant, you have to understand the law itself. What does it actually take to convict someone of this online PQP crime?
Well, the legal scholarship on this is very clear. According to Article 293, the prosecution has to prove 3 different elements, and they have to prove them simultaneously. It's not a pick-and-choose situation.
And what are those 3?
Okay, so first is objective falsity. The information has to be a provable fabrication, a false fact, not an opinion, not satire, but, demonstrably untrue.
Okay, factually wrong. Got it.
Second is subjective intent. The person has to knowingly spread that false information. They can't just be mistaken or sharing something they believe is true. They have to know it's a lie.
And the third?
Resulting harm. And this is the big one. The action has to cause severe public disorder or chaos. Real, tangible disruption.
That seems like an incredibly high bar, especially for something like a tweet or a forwarded article.
Yeah.
So how did the court get past those requirements?
That is the core conflict here. The court's rationale, it seems to rely heavily on an assumption about Dr. Chen's identity, not on evidence for those 3 points.
What do you mean by his identity?
Well, the verdict explicitly states that because he has a high degree of education and knowledge, he should have been able to distinguish right from wrong.
Wow. So his PhD was effectively used as evidence of his guilt.
In a way, yes. The court basically concluded that he knowingly forwarded pictures and articles that were insulting and attacking the state leadership core, and then they just asserted that these posts were false information and that they caused severe public disorder.
It was an assertion, not a proof.
The sources suggest it was an assertion without strong empirical backing. And the evidence itself was, pretty sporadic. We're talking about him forwarding some political cartoons, some academic discussion, even a diplomatic post from the U.S. consulate.
This wasn't some kind of major disinformation campaign.
Not at all. It was a scholar on social media. And that brings us right to his defense, which was incredibly systematic. He didn't just deny it. He used his own expertise to try and dismantle the prosecution's entire case.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. He fights back with science.
Exactly. His team attacked all 3 of those required elements, arguing the court was just running on assumptions, which violates that, bedrock principle of benefit of the doubt to the defendant.
So let's break that down. What was his first point of defense?
Okay, so defense point 1 was on falsity and the nature of speech. The defense argued that most of what he forwarded wasn't even a factual statement to begin with.
Meaning?
It was academic commentary, subjective emotional expression, satire. Think about a political cartoon. How do you prove a cartoon is objectively false? Its purpose isn't to state a fact.
Right, its purpose is to make a point or to criticize.
And
And the law should recognize that distinction.
it's fundamental. Judicial guidance says only verifiable facts can be deemed false under PQP. If the prosecution couldn't prove the original content was definitively untrue, which the defense argued they didn't, then that first pillar of the crime just collapses.
Okay, so that's the attack on falsity. Now, what about the severe chaos part? This is where his PhD in complex systems comes in, right?
This is the most innovative part of the entire case. He literally used network theory to argue against the existence of any public disorder.
How does that even work?
He treated the information network like a scientific system. He argued that as a low connectivity edge node, that means he had under 100 followers and less than 100 total forwards, his actions could not possibly create the avalanche effect needed for severe disorder.
He's saying he's too small to matter in the system.
He's saying the system itself is robust and his microaction couldn't cause it to fail. It's like arguing that, dropping one pebble into the Pacific Ocean can't cause a tsunami. It's a matter of scale and impact.
It's a powerful argument. Did he have any proof?
He had what the defense called a killer fact, the most devastating piece of real-world evidence. The supposedly criminal posts, the evidence against him, they remained online after his arrest.
Okay.
And they generated, quote, no attention, no forwards, and no discussion. Nothing happened, which empirically proves they didn't cause and weren't causing any severe chaos.
That feels like game over for that part of the charge. If the evidence itself causes no disorder, how can you convict someone for it?
It's a very compelling counterargument, and it leads straight into his third point, about his subjective intent. The court said his high education meant he knew he was causing trouble.
But he flipped that around.
He flipped it completely. He argued that based on his scientific analysis, he knew his actions were harmless and ineffective. Therefore, he couldn't have had the criminal intent, the Mingzi, to willfully disturb public order. His expertise, he argued, was proof of his innocence, not his guilt.
So the court's identity-based guilty presumption was turned on its head.
Precisely. You're being judged on who you are, not on the actual measurable consequences of what you did.
Which, despite all this, the court still upheld the conviction. And that takes us beyond the law and into, well, some really deep philosophical territory.
It really does. The critiques in our sources frame this as an assault on 4 major principles of liberty. Let's start with J.S. Mill and the harm principle.
Mill's idea is simple, right? You can only restrict someone's freedom to prevent direct physical harm to other people.
Exactly. And this conviction is a clear violation. Dr. Chen was punished for spreading ideas that caused political discomfort, not for causing any measurable harm. In Mill's view, suppressing nonviolent thought is a tyranny of the majority.
And that ties into the next one, Isaiah Berlin's 2 concepts of liberty.
It does. The conviction obviously invades what Berlin called negative liberty, your freedom from coercion. But the court's argument that an educated person should know better, that's where Berlin's biggest warning comes in.
What's the warning?
He warned about the state trying to enforce its own definition of a rational citizen. It's a dangerous kind of positive liberty, where the state says, we know what you ought to think, and then uses the law to enforce it. It's intellectual coercion.
Then there's F. Hayek and the rule of law.
Right. Hayek championed predictable, universally applied laws. The PQP charge is often called a pocket crime because it's so vague it can be used for almost anything.
So it's unpredictable.
It's unpredictable, and the sources point to selective enforcement. Thousands of others shared similar content and faced no penalty. For Hayek, that's not rule of law, it's arbitrary rule. It's what he called the fatal conceit, the state pretending it can control social outcomes.
And finally, John Locke's social contract. How does that fit in?
For Locke, the government's only legitimate job is to protect life, liberty, and property. When it uses a vague law like PQP to suppress criticism, it violates that trust. Locke would call that an overreach, a key indicator of tyranny.
So these are powerful arguments against the substance of the conviction. But what about the process? The sources highlight a chain of procedural errors that sound just as troubling.
Oh, absolutely. They point to systemic failures. The defense claimed the investigation started with basically 0 evidence, leading to police forcibly entering his home.
And there are allegations of coercion, too.
Serious allegations, threats, physical abuse, sleep deprivation, all to get his passwords.
Which would make any evidence they found completely inadmissible under most legal standards.
It should. But it didn't stop there. The first trial was held non-publicly, which violates principles of transparency and public oversight.
And then came the appeal, with what one legal scholar called the most egregious procedural error of the case.
Yes. The appeals court upheld the verdict and refused to even hold a hearing. And their reason was that the appellant, Dr. Chen, who was in prison, mind you, had failed to submit new evidence to support his appeal.
Wait, this is a criminal case. The burden of proof is on the prosecution.
Yeah.
How can a court say the prisoner didn't bring enough new evidence to prove his own innocence?
It's a complete illegal reversal of the burden of proof. It violates the presumption of innocence. The responsibility was shifted from the state to the imprisoned scholar. It turned the appeal into a rubber stamp.
So they just dismissed all his arguments, the scientific ones, the legal ones.
Dismissed them all as inconsistent with the ascertained facts, and that was that. The final verdict.
So after this whole deep dive, what does this mean for you, the listener? We've seen how a charge requiring concrete harm was met with a rigorous scientific defense showing there was no harm. And yet, the conviction was upheld.
The key takeaway, I think, is how an elastic pocket crime can become a tool for thought censorship. The critique suggests the problem wasn't Dr. Chen's posts, but an institutional willingness to prioritize ideological conformity over universal legal principles. It punishes the very act of exploration.
And it's important to remember, he even tried to connect his actions to the state's own goals. He argued that punishing him for sharing foreign information went against the national strategy of promoting civilizational exchange.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to consider. If the goal is a stable and prosperous society, what's the greater source of disorder? Is it the lone scholar quietly forwarding complex or critical ideas? Or is it the judicial act of criminalizing the search for knowledge itself? The decision to silence thought has consequences for the entire system, far beyond a single social media post.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.